All right, so today we're diving deep into human nature with Robert Greene and his book, The Laws of Human Nature. We're dissecting his Google Talk, and let me tell you, I'm ready for some fascinating insights. You with me?
Oh, absolutely. Greene doesn't hold back. Right off the bat, he claims that up to 95% of our behavior is driven by unconscious forces.
95%. So all that planning we do, all those pros and cons lists we make, are you saying our conscious minds are basically just along for the ride?
It's not quite that simple, but Greene makes a compelling case that our unconscious plays a much bigger role than we realize. He points to neuroscience, specifically the structure of our brains, to explain this. Imagine a ladder with the oldest, most primal parts at the bottom, governing things like our fight or flight response.
Right.
As you climb that ladder, you encounter the limbic system, which is all about emotions.
Ooh, emotions, the fun stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
And finally, at the very top sits the neocortex, the part responsible for logic, language, rational thought, all the things that make us feel like we're in control.
So we've got the emotional old guard downstairs and the rational newcomer in the penthouse suite. What happens when these two clash?
Think of emotions like those really powerful ancient signals that can hijack even the best laid plans. Greene uses Isaac Newton as a prime example.
Wait, Isaac Newton, as in the father of physics, Mr. Gravity himself.
The one and only. Newton was meticulous about tracking his investments, but he still lost a fortune in the South Sea bubble, a classic example of an economic bubble gone bust. If someone like Newton, known for his rationality, could get swept up in a speculative frenzy, it just shows how strong those unconscious forces can be.
Okay, that's a little unnerving. You'd think someone like Newton would have seen the writing on the wall.
Exactly. But those emotional signals, they often drown out the quieter whispers of logic coming from the neocortex.
So how does this play out in our own lives, besides, losing all our money in a historical economic bubble?
Think about a time you felt unexpectedly angry or frustrated, maybe snapped at someone you care about, or a time you made a decision in the heat of the moment that you later regretted. Like that time you bought those concert tickets even though you were trying to save money.
Oh, totally. I once booked a last-minute flight because of a catchy ad, just completely threw my budget out the window. It's like my brain went on vacation and let my emotions run wild with my credit card.
That's the effective heuristic at work. It's a fancy way of saying we often make decisions based on gut feelings, and then our brains scramble to justify them with logic after the fact. We're masters of post-rationalization.
Which honestly makes us all vulnerable to manipulation. Are you saying even something as simple as an ad can hijack my brain? I'm starting to feel like I need to watch my back every time I pick up my phone.
It's not about living in fear of manipulation, but about awareness. Greene emphasizes self-awareness as a powerful tool. Next time you feel a strong emotion welling up, take a moment before reacting. Ask yourself, why am I feeling this way? Is there something else going on beneath the surface?
So pause before you reply to that email, right? Don't make any life-altering decisions when you're hangry. Seems simple enough, but untangling those emotional threads can't be easy.
You're right, it takes practice. Greene talks about a psychoanalyst who had a patient stuck in this cycle of sabotaging his relationships. Turns out this pattern stemmed from a deep-seated fear of abandonment, rooted in his childhood, something he was totally unaware of.
So we could be carrying around emotional baggage from childhood, impacting our lives today, and not even realize it. That's kind of a lot to process.
And we've only just scratched the surface?
So we're not always as rational as we like to think we are. Emotions can definitely lead us down some interesting paths. But what about empathy? Isn't that kind of the key to, better relationships, understanding each other?
Greene would agree with you there. Empathy is essential, especially when it comes to navigating our social world. He sees it as this powerful instinct that helped us survive and thrive in groups. But just like everything else, it's not that straightforward. There's always a catch.
There's always a catch, right?
There's-
So what's the catch with empathy?
Well, our capacity for empathy is constantly battling it out with another innate drive: narcissism.
Hold on. Isn't narcissism more about being self-centered? Staring in the mirror all day?
Well, it's not always that extreme. Greene argues that we all fall somewhere on the narcissism spectrum. He connects it to our childhood experiences and how we develop our sense of self.
Oh, so those early years when we're figuring out who we are in the world.
Exactly. As kids, we crave attention and validation, especially from our parents, right? It's how we build self-esteem. But then as we grow older, that attention inevitably shifts, and it can leave us with this sense of loss.
So we create this identity that we can always rely on.
It's a survival mechanism. And as we mature, that self-love can manifest in us seeking out people who validate our worldview. We gravitate towards people who look like us, think like us, even share the same taste in music.
Which explains why we can sometimes find ourselves in these echo chambers surrounded by people who agree with us all the time. But that can't be good for developing empathy, right?
Exactly. Greene argues that this is how tribalism can take root, even in seemingly harmless environments like company cultures.
He uses examples like Microsoft, where there was this strong emphasis on conformity in American apparel, which had more of a wild, anything-goes culture.
And he contrasts these with Google's more open and playful environment. Each company developed its own set of unwritten rules and values that really influenced everything, from dress code to how people interact.
It's like we're hardwired to want to fit in even when we don't realize it.
It's part of being human, this desire to belong, to be part of a tribe.
So we've got empathy battling with narcissism. How do we tip the scales?
Yeah.
How do we cultivate more empathy, especially when we're dealing with people who are really different from us?
Greene suggests something kind of interesting. He says we should treat people like fascinating characters in a movie.
Ooh, okay, that's a new one. I like it.
The idea is that the more you try to understand someone's story, their background, their motivations, their experiences, the easier it becomes to connect with them on a human level, even if you don't see eye to eye on everything.
So instead of writing someone off because of their political beliefs or their taste in music, we should try to understand why they feel that way or enjoy those things.
Precisely. Get curious.
This reminds me of what Greene calls generational narcissism. The idea that each generation thinks they're superior to the ones that came before and after.
And he actually debunks that myth with this hilarious quote from a Sumerian tablet written around 1000 BC. It basically says, "Kids these days are rotten. They'll never understand our culture."
Some things never change, right? But seriously, if generations are always going to clash, how do we bridge that divide?
It starts with understanding that each generation develops its own zeitgeist. That's like a shared set of values, tastes, and assumptions that are shaped by the culture they grew up in.
So like the music I listened to in high school had a much bigger impact on me than anything I listen to now.
Exactly. Trying to get someone from a different generation into your favorite band now. Good luck with that.
Tell me about it.
Yeah.
But if we can remember that we're all products of our time period, it might make us a little more forgiving of those differences.
Absolutely. It's not about who's right or wrong. It's about recognizing that we're all navigating the world with the tools we've been given.
Well said. It's like we're all part of this giant, messy tapestry of human experience. Speaking of understanding different perspectives, Greene brings up this powerful example in his talk, the incredible story of Ernest Shackleton and his Antarctic expedition. Talk about navigating human nature under pressure.
Shackleton's story, it's like a masterclass in leadership and a testament to understanding human nature when things get tough. Really tough.
So paint the picture for us. We're talking Antarctica in the early 1900s, right? How bad does it get?
Picture this. You're leading an expedition to Antarctica. Your ship gets trapped in the ice. You're forced to abandon ship. Stranded on an ice floe. Supplies dwindling. Facing the brutal Antarctic winter. No guarantee of rescue.
Okay, I'm already stressed just hearing about it. Talk about a leadership nightmare. How did Shackleton even wrap his head around that?
He focused on three main things. First, he knew he had to make rational decisions, even with everything falling apart.
Which is way easier said than done, right? Staying calm in a crisis.
Oh, absolutely.
Hmm.
And that leads to his second stroke of genius. He knew he had to connect with his men on a personal level. Shackleton made it a point to understand each man's personality, their background, their sense of humor.
So it wasn't just about keeping the entire group afloat, but tending to each individual.
Exactly. He knew negativity could spread like wildfire. So he talked to each man in a way that resonated with them, offered support and encouragement tailored to their personality.
It's a good reminder that even in a crisis, it's about connecting as humans.
And finally, Shackleton understood that sometimes the biggest threat comes from within.
You mean like that shadow side we were talking about?
Yeah, exactly. He knew fear, despair, conflict could tear the group apart. So he found ways to channel those darker impulses into something productive. Organized soccer games, encouraged singing and storytelling, even allowed a bit of controlled revelry. Let the men blow off some steam.
He gave them an outlet instead of letting it bottle up. Brilliant.
Shackleton's story perfectly illustrates how understanding human nature, the good and the bad, can be the key to not just surviving, but thriving in even the toughest situations.
And while most of us will never face an Antarctic expedition, these insights are still relevant to our own lives. Leading a team, negotiating a deal, even just having a productive conversation with a family member.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing those hidden forces in ourselves and others and figuring out how to work with them, not against them.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Greene's work, what's one thing our listeners can take away and apply to their own lives?
Greene reminds us that we all have a shadow side, those not so great impulses that can lead us astray. This week, I challenge you to think about your own emotional triggers. What patterns do you notice? What can those patterns teach you about yourself?
Now that's something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the complexities of human nature. Until next time.
It's been a pleasure.